FSB. FSB.
Hello everyone, we're absolutely delighted to have you here at our FSB webinar. My name is Holly Whittles and I will be your host for today. I'm a director of a small business just like yourselves. We're called Purple Frog and we're based in the West Midlands. But I've also got a national policy role with the Federation of Small Businesses where I'm very much championing skills and apprenticeships. So I'm really excited for this webinar. We've got some great speakers and some great panelists. And if you want to join in, there's a Q&A, so pop your question in there and we will come to them. But I just wanted to sort of open it out with apprenticeships are a really great way for people to start a career by getting really good work experience at the same time as a relevant qualification. But also it's a great way of upskilling your existing staff. And it's something that I did myself in my own business. I wanted to do a qualification in human resources and in lockdown, I actually went through that. So it's a really good way of continuing that lifelong learning, that professional development. But despite these benefits, apprenticeship starts are actually dropping for young people, especially at the lower levels. And for small businesses, these starts are dropping. So if we want to really boost the local economies, then we need to start thinking about how we can close that skills gap and boost the local economy. So this apprenticeship is about debunking that, and we've got some fantastic speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Lynn and Ryan from Potential Realised, and then we're going to move on to some panelists after that. So I will come back to you and enjoy the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Holly. We'll just get this slide deck up and then we'll introduce ourselves and get going. So thank you, Ryan. Okay, all right. So I think just following on from what Holly said, just by way of introduction, my name is Lynn. I'm the CEO of Potential Realised and the founder of the business. We're a small business operating in the Northwest, and I'm joined today by Ryan, my business partner, and our managing director. And we're going to talk about some of the myths and misconceptions of apprenticeships, but really major on the types of apprenticeships that are available out there. And I'm pleased to say that we're also joined by Phil Yates, who's on one of our level 7 apprenticeship programs, and we focus on leadership and HR apprenticeships. Just to give you some context, we've been working in the education space for around 25 years now, and we became an apprenticeship provider about 4 years ago at the start of COVID. And we found out that there's a lot of myths and misconceptions from employers who want to access the levy, from apprenticeships not knowing how to engage with them. And also we've been on a huge learning journey ourselves. So I'm just going to kick off with that, and then we're going to move over and start thinking about some of the benefits. So if you glance down the screen here, there's a lot of myths that are on there. And when we move over to the panel chat, you'll have an exploration session and be able to tap into some of these. But I think from our perspective, one of the key points is that apprenticeships can be accessed by anybody. So just focusing on point 1, it's not just young people. Yes, they are important for young people. So school leavers at 16, people who are perhaps thinking about going to university but want to do some work-based training can access these at 18. But we know for a fact that we engage with a range of employers, as do other providers in all sorts of fields, who are sometimes in their 20s, they're in their 30s, they're in their 40s, and even their 50s. So there is a huge value to a range of people who are wanting to engage and validate the professional expertise and add value, more importantly as well, to their businesses. I think there's another misconception that people who are new to a profession are the only people who can access an apprenticeship. And again, this is just not the case. If you are working within a specific field, just using Holly as an example there, she used lockdown to actually do some formal training around her HR professional expertise. And that's no different for any sector that you work in, whether that's accountancy, whether it's the construction trade, engineering, whether it's hospitality. Apprenticeships are accessible to a range of people, and you can access the funding in a variety of ways. And in a couple of slides' time, I'll pass you to Ryan and he'll talk about accessing that levy funding. So I think that's really important to be mindful of. It's open to a range of people, and there are huge benefits, some of which I'll talk to you about on the next slide. So I think the benefits of an apprenticeship is that you've got a planned curriculum. So if you're thinking as a small business owner, or you've got people within your team about accessing the apprenticeship levy, you can be guaranteed that you're going to get a structured curriculum, very much like when you're in formal education. And that is based around 3 core components. There's a knowledge element, so that's teaching you new theoretical bases, maybe new perspectives, maybe shining a light on something that perhaps you've not thought about before. And obviously, as an apprentice, you'll be going through a learning journey with your peers as well. So as well as your peers and your employer, you're going to start developing new knowledge and new insights. And so what does that mean? That means that knowledge will add value to you as a professional. It means you can start to question, so what? How can that advance my skills in the workplace? And because you'll be given time to consolidate that knowledge and that learning, you start to see new insights in the workplace. And that impacts how you go about your daily life in the workplace. It adds value to your skills and your behaviours. And undoubtedly, it adds value to the culture of your company and also potentially to the bottom line. So there's huge benefits. A couple before I hand over to Ryan are particularly linked to succession planning and career development. So for example, somebody may decide to start their apprenticeship journey and study for a level 3 apprentice. And as a consequence of that new learning and that insight, they decide that they want to do some more training. They may get a promotion and then they get to middle management, for example, and they then do a level 5 apprenticeship. And that then may have a knock-on effect because of those new insights and the value add to themselves and the business to thinking, well, I'll do a level 7. So there's a huge career trajectory that can come part and parcel of studying for any apprenticeship program, regardless of the sector or the expertise that you have as a professional. So I'm going to hand you over to Ryan now, who's going to talk to you about actually the different levels and importantly accessing the levy.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lynn. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to briefly go through a couple of slides, the level of apprenticeships first and foremost. And as you can see by the screen there, it starts at level 2, which is equivalent to the educational level of GCSEs. And it goes all the way up to degree level, which is 6 and 7, which is again equivalent of a bachelor's or a master's degree. I think it's worth a mention as well, the minimum apprenticeship that you'll take will take a minimum of 12 months. And that can go up to anything between 36 months and 48 months, depending on the apprenticeship that you take, but also depending on the training provider as well. So some training providers may shorten the length of the apprenticeships that you take purely because there's a need for that within different businesses and from apprentices as well. You've got to be 16 to be eligible to do an apprenticeship or over. You've got to be living in the UK or work in the UK at least 50% of your time. You can't be in full-time education, and also that depending on the apprenticeship that you're taking, the level that you're taking, there'll also be a requirement that you have to have English and maths, which is a 2.9 level in functional skills or the equivalent of within that. So again, there's a number of training providers which will help you with that as an employer, which can then provide that additional functional skills training that the individual may need to go on to the program. So if I can then just move on to accessing the levy. This is most probably one of the biggest areas that we are talking to our clients or our learners about, really understanding what are the differences between a levy payer and a non-levy payer. The levy payer fundamentally is an organisation or an employer that has a wage bill more than £3 million a year. If they have a wage bill of more than £3 million a year, they will pay 0.5% of that 3 million or above into their levy pot. Once they've paid that into their levy pot, it runs on a 24-month rolling plan, which means that whatever I pay in today on months like June today, if I don't spend what's in that pot that month, and I don't spend it over the due course of them 24 months, whatever's in that month will drop off the end, and that'll go into the wider pot. So it'll come out of your personal, or not your personal, but your organizational pot, and it will be lost. So this is another thing that we encourage our clients to do, to ensure that they're utilizing their funding and not losing it due to the fact that they're not it's not benefiting their employees. The good news is some of the large organizations that aren't able to use their levy, they are able to gift up to 50%. This generally would be supporting their supply chain. So anybody that may have a customer, say, for example, in the NHS, you could approach the NHS if you're a non-levy payer, and you could see whether they would have any surplus funding, and they may want to gift that to your organisation if you're a non-levy payer. If you are a non-levy payer, as I've said before, it's funded by the wider levy pot. Again, this is something a lot of small organisations aren't aware of, because they think that they're not paying into the levy pot. They think they can't get access to that pot. Well, the good news is, if you're not aware of that, you can. If you do decide to put one of your employees on a program, you would only have to pay 5% of the overall cost, with some examples I'll bring attention in a moment. And another thing to be aware of, if you have less than 50 employees and the individual is less than 24 years old on enrollment day of that program, then you would not have to pay that other 5% as well. Now, just give you an example in terms of the architect degree there. If you look at that level 7 line, the maximum funding there is 21,000 for that apprenticeship. Be mindful that is a maximum funding. A maximum funding means that that's the maximum amount that can be awarded to the training provider. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to pay that amount. And if you want to ask some questions in the panel, we'd be more than happy to explain that a little bit further. But just for the example that we are paying the 21,000, if you're a levy payer, that 21,000 pounds would actually come out of your levy pot. Now, in some cases, you may not have that amount of money. And again, we're very happy, if that's the case, very happy to explain a little bit more within the panel at the end. If you are a non-levy payer, you can just see the 5% of that overall 21,000 is 1,050. And that's assuming that somebody would be over the age of 24, that payment would need to be made. That payment is generally made within the first 3 months, and that needs to be paid to the provider direct from the employer. Okay, Lynn.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So I think just sort of reflecting on where we're at now, I think we can probably ascertain that there are huge benefits of investing in people. The actual academic piece and the costs on the previous slide demonstrate that the programs are substantial, and I've already explained about the knowledge and the skills and the behaviour impact. I think another angle to look at this from is to understand that if you decide that you want to access the apprenticeship levy and educate yourself in a different way and validate your learning and or invest in your team, you can be assured that there is a quality assurance framework, so that rather like when somebody goes to university, the training provider is accountable for providing good quality education. So this here slide just shows the accountability framework that are, if you like, some of the measures that training is sort of accounted for against. Again, I won't go into detail here, but the first line here talks about employer feedback, apprenticeship feedback, the number of withdrawals, and apprenticeships who perhaps go past their end date. These are all quality and due diligence measures that are looked at to make sure that the provision and the training that your apprentices are getting is up to speed and is correct. The final one here links to a break in learning. People have different things going on. People have different challenges. So sometimes they need to pause, and that's allowable. And they can have a break in their learning and then come back to it. Just again, because you'll get the slides later, the middle section here on all these slides show the percentages or the requirements that need to be adhered to currently. You'll see in the final column of this slide, there are new measures coming into play from this month. So we've just put a little bit of an education and awareness piece around that. And again, if there are questions around that, we can talk to you, and or if you engage with an apprenticeship provider, they will be able to give you a bit of advice on that as well. Okay, so in the interest of time, we've got a final perspective just to share with you. And I'm really pleased to say that we've got Phil Yates on the call, who is on one of our level 7 HR apprenticeship programs. So if I can bring Phil in, he's going to do a real potted snapshot of why he's doing this and the benefits to him and his business. And then we'll finish off with a short clip from a level 3 learner that we've got on a video. So over to you, Phil, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. Essentially, for me, the big benefit of doing a level 7 apprenticeship is the strategic piece. So I already came into, I had a master's degree from university, but it's something totally different. And being able to access an apprenticeship means as long as this learning is new for me, I can access it through my employer's levy. So within me, I work in the learning and development, talent development space. And what this level 7 also does is gives me a broader context of the wider HR space, so that as I move up into a more strategic role from an operational one, it gives me that spectrum of generalist HR and ER, ED&I, recruitment and L&D, which means when I'm in a more senior role, that context can be applicable a little bit better than what I'm doing now. I think also the ability to collaborate with other people doing the apprenticeship in different roles from different types of businesses. I've never worked in a public sector organisation. A lot of my colleagues on the apprenticeship have, so learning from them is incredibly valuable as well. And from an employer's perspective, I happen to look after the apprenticeship levy for my own organisation. It's really handy that it shows us that we're investing in our people. This is a 3-year or more apprenticeship at a seriously high level, and so that investment, but we have the money in the levy pot anyway, as Ryan's already mentioned. So it just speaks to that ability to invest in the team and to watch them grow. And in a lot of industries, we're struggling to get leaders and managers up, and this is a fantastic way of educating them and encouraging them to step up and to learn. And I think this sort of session here really does help to debunk things, because coming into an apprenticeship at over 40 years old is, people don't realize that's possible to do, but it really is. And the final thing to say is, certainly with my one, I get a diploma out of this as well, so I can get an official qualification and no extra cost other than the apprenticeship levy. Not all of them do that, but some provide that. So not only do you get an apprenticeship, but that certified thing where you can get some letters after your name as well, providing those bodies buy into that. So another really fantastic benefit for us.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I've just got a very small clip here. We've heard from Phil in terms of a level 7, which is the higher end of the apprenticeship levels. We've got a guy here called James. It's just a 30-second clip just to finish off with. His story was when he was at school that he left school with no qualifications and had very little confidence or self-belief in himself because he felt that the schooling system failed him. And his story was something that's really touched everybody. And when we did the presentation, he works for a FTSE 100 company now as a supervisor in a warehouse. And he had the entire team who was there on his presentation day in tears, because the story he shared, he said, if I didn't do this apprenticeship, in terms of the the support and help he got from his training provider, which was ourselves, he said if he'd got half the amount of attention and support, he'd have done so much better at school, and maybe he would have left school with some qualifications, and maybe he would have had a lot more confidence to to jumpstart his career a lot sooner from where he is. So this is James's story in terms of his 60 seconds here for you.
When I was asked to do an apprenticeship last year, I didn't know what to expect. It'd been a very long time since I'd done any learning. In fact, I was 16 and I was at school. Admittedly, I struggled at first, but with the support from the trainers at Potential Realised, I was able to learn new skills and develop those skills and become a better team leader and a better role model for my team. I'm now using them skills on a day-to-day basis in the workplace. I'm becoming a better manager and a better leader because of the apprenticeship that I've done.
So back over to you, Holly.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lynn, Ryan and Phil. We do have some questions in the chat, and there were some questions about the apprenticeship levy for the English region. Obviously, it's slightly different for Scotland, Wales and Ireland. So it's worth checking out what their government schemes do, because it does operate slightly differently. But it's a really good question about, as a business owner, do you need to have someone in the business who can guide the apprentice or be a supporting role? So what would you recommend if you haven't got that person in place?
Okay. In terms of that, there are specific funding rules, and you do need somebody who's going to be a line manager. So there are funding rules that, again, I can take offline. So if you are on your own, that is a potential challenge. And the reason why you need to have a line manager is it's mandatory that there are progress reviews, typically every 12 weeks. So you need somebody to mentor you and support you alongside the training provider. So there is that requirement, but you don't need to be a large organisation. You would need somebody who could act in that position. But again, I can take more questions separately offline if needed, but that does align to the funding rules.
Yeah, and then there was another good question about where can you find a list of training providers? Like, so someone it was in the electrical industry, where would they go to find them?
Yeah, so there's a .gov website. Again, I can produce this for you after, Holly, in terms of the website. I've not got it on hand at the moment, but I'd be very happy to send it to you afterwards, so you can forward it on to the individuals asking that question. Generally, on that website, goes on there, and there's a box on there. You type in what apprenticeship you're looking for, and it will then give you a list of the apprenticeship, and then it'll give you a list of the providers in terms of the framework and that. So all the information's there on .gov for you.
I think the good thing about that as well is I talked about the quality provisions and the feedback. When you go on that site, you can see feedback from employers and apprentices, which shows their experience. So again, that will help you if it's a new area to ascertain, oh, I might talk to a few of these and get a feel for if they're a good fit for me. So it gives you that additional quality piece that we talked about on one of those slides.
Definitely. So we will come back to you. I would recommend having a look at the Skills for Life website. So the government have pulled this together where it's a one-stop shop for all resources to do with all this kind of stuff. So if you put Skills for Life into any browser, you will end up on the Gov website where it's got all of these signposts. But we have got some panelists with us. So I'd just like to introduce each one. They're going to spend 3 or 4 minutes just sort of talking through their own experiences. So I'd like to move to Neil first.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Neil Coles, and I have a business called Coles Sewing Centre in Nottingham. We are specialist sewing machine suppliers and associated products. So we have a retail arm and we have a business-to-business arm as well. We took on our first apprentice back in 2009, and he's still with us. He's now a senior service engineer for us. And currently we have 2 team leaders on doing level 3, have done level 2, moved on to level 3. We've got a customer service apprentice who's done similar. He's now working level 3 from level 2. and we have a engineer apprentice who's working up to level 3 as well. So they've been with us for a number of years working through this, and all I can say is the experience has been good. There are pitfalls on the way. You have basic problems at the beginning, for instance, getting people to come in on time, not taking a day off when they feel like it. You get all those initial things, especially if they've been not necessarily in employment before. But you work through those and work with your apprenticeship supplier, college, etc. And you'll get through the difficulties and the problems, and then it starts to turn a little bit. We're now finding that the apprentices are bringing things to the business. For instance, the 2 team leaders, we've got new processes in place that I had never thought of that work really well for all the members of staff. We have set up something called a standard operating procedure. So every process within the business has been documented as part of a project by one of the team leaders. The retail apprentice has brought to us something quite amazing, but very basic. He's done a project on packaging, and he's trained all of us, plus our customers, when returning stuff, how to package things correctly so stuff doesn't get so damaged in transit, which has been amazing. Our service engineer apprentice, George, he has brought in new ways of doing things within the workshop, and we can feedback something to him where we're having a problem. He'll take it to college with him and come back with a solution. So I would say, apprenticeships, it looks scary at first. You think, oh my God, the time investment's going to be terrible. I don't know what sort of people I'm going to get. Stick with it. You will find it'll start to be very rewarding very quickly. And we've found that the people stay with us. And one thing that's been really good at being a small business, we really haven't got much of a sort of opportunity for promotion, but giving them the opportunity to go to do something like, for instance, a team leader course has given them a path, if you like, within the business, a career path. So yeah, a few negatives, a few problems on the way. You can get bogged down with the paperwork initially, but it's worth sticking through it. You'll certainly see results pretty quickly. You'll also know if the apprentice you've got is not really fit for the role, and vice versa. I mean, we've had a few occasions where we've just had to terminate or they've terminated. But it's like recruiting anybody. They're not necessarily going to be the right fit for the job, and you don't know that until they've been with you for a little while. Same with apprenticeships. But with the benefit of the apprenticeships is you've got support of the local college to help you through the process. And there is, specialist people within the college that assist in recruitment and retention. So yes, for us, it's been an excellent experience, and I would certainly recommend it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. David, I'd like to move to you next to share your experiences of apprenticeships.
Thank you. Yes, my name's David Barnes, and we have a small IT firm, Barnes IT Solutions, in the south of Essex. And we've had a number of apprentices over the years since the new modern apprenticeship scheme was, shall we say, relaunched and rebranded. We tend to focus on having level 2 and 3, and we've got a desire to push to level 4. Now, generally, they're IT technicians, customer service operators. It tends to be, when you're looking after small businesses, you're doing a jack of all trades. So you're doing IT technician, customer service, network engineer, systems admin, across the board. So it really gives a good slice of a step into what the modern technology world is all about. So we work with the local college, and we've had several really good apprentices that come through that have added extreme value to the business. I think the challenge for every business is, you think it's okay, we just get another member and it's another way of employing a member of staff. It's not. The key thing is you get out what you put in. So the more time you put aside to spend time with that apprentice and help them on that journey, because at the end of the day, they've been in full-time education for all of their life, and they haven't got a clue what the world of work is all about. And that's where the apprenticeship is really good, because they can have a day or two in the classroom, they can maintain that existing structure that they're used to all their life, and then they can have this bit of the world of work. And it's our challenge as an employer to actually aid them on that process, to help them grow up from being a youngster at school under the rules and regulations. How does it function when you're in a workplace and you've actually got to be a little bit autonomous? You've got to act on your own initiative sometimes. And yes, the usual thing, you buy them a wristwatch, make sure their mobile phone account's topped up so you can call them when they're late, and buy them an alarm clock. But you know, these are things that we've got used to, and we help them with these things because at the end of the day, it's actually really stressful for the youngsters, that step from school to employment, and they don't necessarily understand the rules and regulations around employer responsibilities and those. And in some respects, that's our job, to teach them that and learn them that. But that aside, there is so much they bring to the table in terms of their enthusiasm. You know, you're seeking that wet sponge that wants to soak up the knowledge that you've got, and they just give back so much. It's you put 10% effort in, you get 110% back. I can only thoroughly recommend it. And yes, you will know if the apprentice isn't up to the world of work, or isn't up to that particular field that you're working in, you'll know very quickly. And it's something you'll work with the training provider, and don't be afraid to pick up the phone and talk to the support person at the training provider. They're there to help you and guide you through that process. We've gone back from using online providers to using vocational classroom based, because over lockdown we run into one or two mental health issues that we found locally. It's probably better in our industry that we're actually working with where they've got that classroom experience that maintain that. That's just purely what we're finding for the IT tech. There are some IT techs that we've had that have worked through the online system, really good, but the one or two run into a couple of issues. And fortunately, we were able to nip it in the bud, get them some assistance, some help. But it's something to be aware of. It's something to be aware of. It brings new blood into the team. I can only thoroughly encourage it, and talk to your training provider.
Awesome. And I think that's a really good point about the work ready skills and how we can actually get them into the workplace and get them, being productive for us. But my experience of apprenticeships as well was we didn't go through a training provider. We went through our local college. So again, that's another route. So if there's employer advisory boards or hubs or ways of getting in touch with your college, they will all have apprenticeship departments. So I just literally phoned them up and said, I'm looking for apprenticeship to help us with our social media and marketing, and they did all the recruitment for me and took care of it. So there's another route there if you want to engage with colleges. So I'd like to go to Gurdip next.
Hello, hi. So I've got a business in Leamington Spa. It's a Life's beauty salon, so you may hear noise in the background, so I do apologise. When you've got a team in the salon at the same time and you try and find a corner to hide, it's never easy. So our business, we've been around for 26 years and we've been taking on apprentices probably for the last 10 years. And we found for us, you're aligning your culture with new staff members from day one. And it's an 18-month apprenticeship for level 2 and then for level 3. We regularly take on level 3s because they may have already done level 2s at college. And it embeds your therapist into your business, so they understand how you deliver certain treatments, how your business runs. So once they've completed their apprenticeship, are already quite busy therapists, whereas if you take someone who hasn't done an apprenticeship, you've then got to start building their column up from day one. So you've got a bit of a head start through apprenticeships. So for us, the benefit is that the girls get live training in salon as well as at the provider. Now, unfortunately, colleges don't always provide for beauty salons, so we have currently had to work with a provider. So there's some colleges that will do certain apprenticeships, and sometimes if you're quite niche, you would have to go to a provider, just so that you're aware. And what I'd say to the business owners, especially in my industry, so if you are looking for hands-on, for me, it's beauty therapists, whether it's engineers, whatever your business is that they get the skills as they go along with you. So in those 18 months, your therapist or your employee will be pretty much up to speed. So once they've completed their course, got their certificate, they've got so much more to add to your business than if you're just taking someone straight from college that then needs to be trained additionally within your business. Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And I just wanted to add to that as well. I was just remembering that you can use this for existing staff as well. So there was someone in our organisation who'd come to us and she didn't actually go to college and she really wanted a university qualification. So she's currently going through a level sort of 5, 6 and 7, which is equivalent to a university degree. So again, if there are people in your organisation that want to upskill, again, apprenticeships is a great way of doing that. But thank you for your perspective as well. Brilliant. Can I come to Gerard next?
Yes, hello. Thanks for having me on. I'm Gerard Francis from Lighthouse Personnel. We're a small recruitment agency in Colchester in Essex. My background was actually apprenticeship, so I started my career in a training provider and worked my way up. I covered Hampshire, Berkshire, Essex and London and placed apprenticeships into small, medium, large businesses in those areas. So my background was, I've placed over 200, 300 apprentices in that time. So a good experience of doing it from a provider perspective. Provider point of view. And then actually from setting up the business, we've actually had 4 apprentices in the 6 years that we've been running the recruitment agency. And they've all been in office roles, so marketing and recruitment predominantly. 3 of the apprentices that we've had have been really successful and 1 wasn't so, and that was more a character fit. The 3 that we did have, 2 of them marketing, 1 of them recruitment, were very good, very willing. The one that wasn't, we kind of knew when we interviewed them that it wasn't, but probably the biggest struggle we have when recruiting apprentices, we're also a slightly out of the town centre location, so it's harder to get to us. And obviously when taking on young apprentices, you have to think of the transport route of them getting there. And that's we knew it would be tricky to find someone because they can't actually physically get to us. But the recruiting the apprentices is probably the hardest bit, as in we weren't inundated with the roles that we had with recruiting people into the recruitment apprenticeships. Marketing, no issue. Lots of young people wanting to get into marketing. We were spoiled for choice, and it was easy to make the decision. We had some good candidates. Recruiting into the recruitment apprenticeship was tougher because there's not a lot of people that want to get into recruitment, so it was harder for us and that sort of side of things. The other thing in terms of struggles is finding the time for the 20% additional learning hours that you have to find for yourself. So you have to be giving the apprentice that learning time. Some providers will do that as in a classroom if it's more of a manual apprenticeship. In terms of the ones we did that were office based, we had to find the 1 day a week learning for them, but we incentivized the apprentice to do that. So we gave them a day a week from home to come up with different courses that they could do, and we helped them find them. We actually are a member of the FSB as well, of course, so we have the online portal where we had lots of information we could use on that as part of their learning hours. So it wasn't as tricky as I thought, but I know some people struggle with that, finding things for them to learn. But there are lots of resources and you can kind of task them with that themselves. Plus, if they have a solid induction period, that covers a lot of the time as well. So I wouldn't be put off by that for sure. In terms of how it's worked, I mean, I've seen businesses built on apprenticeships. There's a large health and social care recruitment agency near where we are that I used to recruit apprentices in every single month, and their whole business is built off apprentices and ex-apprentices. They've come up with a whole academy scheme where they bring people in at the bottom and then they progress them through the ranks. Having apprentices in the business doesn't just motivate the apprentice, but the people who are working with them. So if you've got employees that have got an apprentice under the wing, they feel more valued that you've trusted them to look after this apprentice. And it brings fresh ideas in and a different perspective than having people that only a workforce of older people. So it's good to have a balance is probably what I'm saying there. And as I say, of course, as with any hire working in recruitment, it doesn't always go right, but I wouldn't blame that on actually it being because it's an apprentice. That's more based on the individual, like others have said. So I'd encourage just the right interview process around that and understanding that they are new, it is their first opportunity. But I think it works really well. We've had nothing but positive experience you know, to say about taking apprentices, and as I said, placing them previously as well, when working for a provider.
Yeah, and actually there's a really good question that's come into the chat about do you actually have to employ them at the end of it? What's your experience of that?
So from my time when I was in apprenticeships, you didn't have to employ them. I believe that's still the case, because I believe the contract that you take them on initially, I'm sure Lynn could probably cover us on this, but I think that when you take them on initially, it is for the length of the apprenticeship. The idea is that it is job creation, and that you should be thinking about, you know, what could a role look like at the end of this. And I know providers are marked on their succession rates, but one of them we actually completed just as the COVID pandemic hit. So we couldn't take them on, and we were gutted because we lost a brilliant person who was amazing. We did find them a role within a couple of weeks because we had a client that we could place them in with, but we were gutted about that. So we didn't have to take them on. We were gutted because we really wanted them at the time. So it was actually, they'd really proven their worth. But from every bit of communication we've had with our provider, it isn't a you have to. The idea is that you would. And also my question back would be around, if you spent a year, 18 months training someone, they've become invaluable, you probably won't want to let them go at that point. But if it isn't working out, I believe there is that option from my understanding.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your insights on that. I'd like to move to John next.
Morning. Yes, apprentices. I took on my first apprentice nearly 20 years ago, and since then we've taken on about 14 apprentices. And I'd say one of the things that's really I've learned from it is how rewarding it is. When they first come in, they're an unpolished diamond, and it's really fascinating watching their journey, how they develop. And it's they eventually become very, very loyal employers. In fact, apprentices actually come through my practice, and I run the county practice in Western-super-Mare, they come through my practice. After they left my employer, they still stay in contact with us after that. And our social evenings are fantastic because there's about 14 people coming along out of us. I've got 6 of us working in the office. So that just shows just how loyal these apprentices become, and you know how much they value what we actually have done for them over the years. And what's really fascinating is just watching what their careers develop. I mean, I've got an current apprentice coming. We've all had a young lady in December as an apprentice administrator, and many of my apprentices come as administrators or straight as trainee accountants, but mostly they've come as administrators and gone into trainee accountants. And my apprentice I took on 2 years ago is currently doing that. And I remember when he first came in, he was very sort of unsure. His office, his experience of how to operate within the office politics was quite naive. And just watching how he's progressed and developed from then, and now he's a very, very proactive employee and highly valued employee. And you know, I'm more than happy, you know, in a year's time, once I feel he's really got that experience, better take on another apprentice, which you will need to do, and be more than confident that he will actually give a very good role model to that new apprentice coming in. And at the top of the tree, one of the apprentices I took on back in 2011, I've seen this young lady come up through you know, the ranks of my office to become a chartered tax advisor now, which is the top of our profession. And she actually manages my office to the stage now that I can actually walk away. I only work 3 days a week now. She actually keeps the office running for me, and she's virtually managing my business now. And that's one of the best aspects, watching someone like Catherine come in as an apprentice and really develop to a stage now where she's a very, very valuable employee. So I certainly would encourage. The other thing I would say is also that I developed a very close relationship with our local college, Western College. And if you develop that relationship, I find I get the cream of the crop of their trainees because of that. And that's what I've really worked on over the years. I mean, I've actually go to college and do talks to their pupils now as well. And also through doing that, I managed to attract apprentices, and they, you know, so it's certainly well worth doing, and I certainly would highly recommend it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your insight. And I totally agree. Certainly with the apprenticeships we have, they've become invaluable parts of the business. So thank you for that insight. And lastly, I just want to move to Gareth before we go to general questions and answers.
Thank you, Holly, and good morning, everyone. So I'm Gareth. I'm a director with First Intuition. Now, in fact, if this webinar has shown anything, it's just the sheer range of different job occupations that apprenticeships are relevant to. I do employ apprentices across marketing, finance, administration, even business development. And as an employer, I've seen, I'd echo what I've heard. I've seen real energy, fresh ideas, real ambition from the, often very young adults coming into our workplace. And it's actually sort of driven everyone in the office to raise their game. It really brings a fresh energy to the whole office. But actually, I'm kind of here to talk more as a provider. First Intuition, we're a provider of accountancy apprenticeships. And actually from levels 2, Ryan was talking about the different levels, but in our sector, it's from levels 2 all the way up to level 7. So GCSE leavers all the way up to university graduates. And I think a lot of people would perhaps not think of an accountancy as an obvious area for apprenticeships. But we work with lots of small accountancy firms, including some offices of tax assist, as John was just speaking from. We deal with lots of small businesses. And in fact, around about 85% of the accountancy trainees I work with in our classrooms are training as apprentices now. And apprenticeships have transformed our sector. So, professions like accountancy, like law even, I think lawyers are now adopting apprenticeships in a much bigger way. And apprenticeships are doing such a huge impact on, the social mobility in these sorts of professions, the diversity. They've really empowered school leaver programs. A few of the panelists so far have talked about the importance of links with local schools and colleges, and that I think is really facilitated by apprenticeships. And in a nutshell, apprenticeships allow employers to pay less and get more. We heard from Ryan earlier about some of the financial benefits of apprenticeships, and for smaller businesses, you get the vast majority, if not all, of the apprenticeship funding band covered by levy funds. And you get more, so it's not just the technical training. I think, as Phil was mentioning earlier, you can cover certain official qualifications in our world. The various chartered accountancy qualifications can be covered under the apprenticeship, but it's so much more. As Lynn was talking about, it's all those broader skills and behaviours. And I talk to employers all the time, and particularly where they're looking at young adults transitioning from education into the workplace. I hear a lot of challenges around basic employability skills like communication, like team working, like customer focus. These are exactly what are embedded into apprenticeship standards, these wider skills and behaviours. So they're really delivering what employers are looking for at the moment, and you're getting a vast majority of the costs covered. So I think they're absolutely ideal. They also help with recruitment. Using apprenticeships can open up new avenues to advertise your vacancies through the National Apprenticeship website. For instance, UCAS, I mean, we'll all have heard of UCAS, probably the biggest brand in education in the country. They're doing incredible work with their new apprenticeship service. So you can advertise apprenticeship vacancies through UCAS. And can you imagine how many young adults are seeing those vacancies? So recruitment is really facilitated. Retention as well. Stats show that apprentices tend to be more sticky as employees, so they will stay with you after their apprenticeship is continued. And I just thought I'd go back to a point Gerard was making around the off-the-job learning, which is often misunderstood. I found over the years it's one of the biggest barriers, actually. And Gerard mentioned 20% off the job. That actually changed a couple of years ago. There was a funding rule change, so it's actually now 6 hours a week, which is possibly less than 20% for a lot of learners. And the key thing with those 6 hours is, although it's called off the job, that doesn't mean they're out of the workplace. There's a common misconception that you're losing these learners for a day a week. The off the job just means when they're developing new skills, new knowledge, taking on new tasks, a lot of which they will do in the workplace in a very productive way. I mean, if they're an apprentice, they're probably spending, I don't know, 3/4 of the time doing new things and learning new skills. So the off the job is a real misconception as to how much of a challenge it is. But thank you for inviting me today.
No, you're most welcome. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat. So I'm going to come to Phil for the first one. So one of the questions is, they've got an internal employee who wants to start an apprenticeship, and do they need to change their employment contract to an apprenticeship version and then revert it back, even though they've already been working for them for 15 years? So I think Phil's going to take this one.
Yeah, and Lisa, thanks for your question. No is the simple answer. I think the difference here is speaks to that misconception between what an apprentice is. So there's a difference here between employing somebody as an apprentice, and that is their employment status and speaks to their contract, and then having an existing member of staff studying an apprenticeship, and they can be totally separate things. So no, absolutely no need. The apprenticeship is a way of accessing learning and gaining a qualification, which is accessible to existing staff and to new staff members. So no, absolutely no need whatsoever. It's almost like you're paying for another training course that they go on with another provider. You wouldn't change the contract for that, so you don't have to be here. You will be asked to sign up with the provider to an apprenticeship agreement with your company, but that's totally different. So no, there'll be absolutely no difference whatsoever.
Oh, brilliant. David, did you want to come in on this as well?
Yes, certainly. We've had a number of apprentices, and actually, I would always say, give your FSB helpline a call. It's not a raw plug, but we've used it extensively. The legal helpline is golden for those small micro businesses when it's all on your plate and you've got to do it yourself. You ring them up. If you can't find the document in the portal, they'll find it for you, or if it's not there, they'll write it for you and they'll hold your hand through that process. We found that invaluable over the years.
Brilliant. Our next question, I'd like to come back to Lynn and Ryan maybe. Do you have any information on supported and inclusive and accessible apprenticeships? So for people that have got additional needs that may not necessarily have the right levels of English and maths, how can they access an apprenticeship?
Hi, okay. So what happens in terms of I suppose the starting point when you engage with an apprentice, there's a baseline and a conversation, as you would expect, around, are you a good fit for the course? Is there any prior learning? And at that point as well, there would be an expectation that if there were any additional needs or any additional support, you'd talk about that there. There is an additional funding stream in terms of additional support that can be tapped into, and that can look in different ways, but you would work in conjunction with your provider and employer to make sure that that additional support is fit for purpose. In terms of the functional skills piece, ordinarily people will come and they'll say, I've got that GCSE, and I'm talking in all money now, when we've moved to a point system, haven't we? I know that because my son's doing his GCSEs at the moment, but in terms of if they've got those certificates, then that is validated. We also have a database. So Michelle, who works with us as our office manager, she would check all of that and help them to access the certificates. Because if you're like me, if I had to find mine now, I might have to be going in my mum's attic or something like that. But regardless of that, if they've not got that level, they can also access funding to study for their functional skills. So James, who we showed the video of, he also, as well as his level 3 team leader, did his functional skills. We happen to be a functional skills centre, so we have in-house delivery team. Not all providers will do that, and that's fine, but they will facilitate that and they will work it in with the learner so that they don't feel too overwhelmed, and that functional skills comes in at an appropriate time. Because in order, and we've not really talked about this, but in order to finish the apprenticeship and go to what we call gateway and endpoint assessment, which is all the stuff where they get to showcase what they do need to have that valid certificate. So there's 2 funding streams, and I'd expect from a due diligence point of view and from a building relationship point of view, additional support would be ascertained at the start, but also because you're building a relationship with that apprentice going through, it may be that something comes up and there's a red flag at some point, and you can still access additional support for a learner, even if you're 6 months into a journey. So it doesn't all have to be baselined at the start, but I would have an expectation that that is discussed and it is at the front foot of people's minds when they start the apprentice, if that helps on both those areas.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah,
and
can I
Gareth,
just add,
did you want to come in on that as well?
Sorry, Holly, can I just add a little bit to that as well, about neurodiversity as well? So there is funding for anybody who fits in, whether being diagnosed as being dyslexic, for example. There is some additional funding, and what we would do at the beginning of any apprentice coming into our business, we would do a level of assessment if that's been identified as additional support for that learner.
Yeah. Sorry, we're just going to bring Gareth in as well on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to add a couple of points actually. Firstly, around the point just being discussed, as a provider, we fall under Ofsted, and one of the things Ofsted, really hot on when they do their inspections, the special educational needs, and making sure that providers are making access available regardless of the candidate's abilities and backgrounds. So that's something that is very high on our agenda as well. I also wanted to add, Lynn was talking earlier in the webinar around the role of the line manager as a kind of mentor and as support for the learner. And I just wanted to stress that we found with the employers we work with that line manager role is one of the most important aspects of a successful apprenticeship program. And you need to get, because you kind of need to get the learner bought into the apprenticeship they're going to be pursuing, but you really need to get the line manager bought in as well. And not have them trying to pull the learner away from their apprenticeship program and away from some of the elements they'll be learning. They've got to really see the benefit as well. So, we try and induct line managers just as much as we induct learners to programs.
Brilliant. And we've just got one final question. How do you start an apprenticeship course rather than an existing one? Any of the panelists wanted to take this one? If not, I just wanted to add in my view on that is that there's something called the digital, there's the route panels. So iFate have loads of route panels made up of employers, and they advise into the apprenticeship standards. So if there isn't an apprenticeship course there that fits your sector and your industry, you can go to iFate and say you want to be part of one of these panels, whatever your sector is, and then you can start feeding into the employer standards that then create the apprenticeships. But I don't know whether anyone else has got any views on that as well.
I mean, I'll follow that up actually, Holly. I mean, iFate, they run these trailblazer groups that, either create or actually update and amend the standards over time. They are always crying out for employers to join those because they are employer-led. So, any employers that want to feed into the standards in their sector, you will be welcomed with open arms.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I sit on one of them and it's a very fulfilling experience. So we're out of time. So I'd really like to thank our speakers and also our panelists for giving up their time. Hopefully it's given you some insights into the real world experiences of having an apprenticeship. They're a great way of discovering new talent, getting fresh perspective, developing and upskilling your existing team, building partnerships and connecting locally. There's loads of free resources online. Look at Skills for Life, look at the FSB Skills Hub, and again, you can phone the FSB helpline. So thank you very much. If there's anything that you didn't quite catch, this webinar will be on replay. So thank you very much, and we will see you again online.